very nice to be here. I've attended some of your programs online, and I'm really impressed with how well organized this center is. And it seems to have really adapted quickly to the internet era too. It quite rapidly evolved to a virtual presence. So it's, I think, one of the thriving centers of FPMT. Oh, hi there, everybody. Did we lose somebody? Okay, no worries. I wanted to thank Nina for inviting me. She's a really wonderful leader. We've had a chance to talk a few times just about the Dharma and about leadership, and it's really wonderful that you're here to help this center continue growing. So thank you for the invitation. So I'm here tonight to talk about self-compassion, which is it's a really interesting topic because we talk about it a lot in the West. And yet it isn't explicitly named in the Buddhist path, in the lamrim. It's not one of the steps in the lamrim, it's self-compassion. And in the uppers, I'm assuming actually a lot of this audience is a little bit more Buddhist, so my talk is geared more toward people who are longer term Buddhist practitioners, even though a lot of my mission in life is to try to adapt Buddhism to people who aren't as experienced with it and who may never accept the Buddhist worldview. But today I'm going to talk a little bit, just assuming people know about the lamrim and so on, because I think a lot of you are long-term practitioners. In fact, longer-term practitioners than me. So in the upper scope of the lamrim, you do compassion meditation with yourself, and that is part of 500,000-year-old lineage. But is that really the first place where self-compassion comes up? And I don't know if this talk can be slightly interactive, but does anybody want to offer their opinion? Where does self-compassion come up in the lamrim, or where does it first come up? What do you think? You don't have to say anything if you don't. Anyway, that's kind of that's the slight amount of dramatic tension in this talk, is to wonder, where does self-compassion come up in the lamrim? So I recently had heard a beautiful talk with Yangtze Rinpoche. I have a lot of people probably know him as a teacher. Does anybody know Yangtze Rinpoche? And he recently gave a beautiful talk about self-compassion, and he described it as this tension between contentment and ambition. And I think so much of Buddhism is about opposing things that seem like opposites, right? Like transcending duality seems to occur actually in every single topic of the lamrim and in Buddhism as general. It's this clashing together of two seemingly opposite ideas. So how do contentment and ambition somehow come together in the lives of a Dharma practitioner or human being? And so he describes it this way. He said that contentment is being okay with everything you are right now. Everything you are right up to the present moment. And then ambition is this ambition to realize your full potential as a human being, to somehow fold those two things together. I felt the same thing. I did about a 1-month retreat in January, and sometimes it's quite trite when you describe like a realization or an aha moment, in your practice. But around the middle of my meditation retreat, I had the very strong feeling of the overlap between karma and emptiness, cause and effect and emptiness, which they often say are very closely related in Tibetan Buddhist path. But I actually felt it instead of just being able to recite it. And what I was feeling was kind of what Yangtze Rinpoche was talking about, is that everything up to this very moment had to be that way. It's almost tautological, right? Like, how could things be any other than the way they are right up to this moment? And to be angry or frustrated about that doesn't quite make sense, from a balanced state of mind. So, and then that's the contentment part, is like acceptance. And then ambition, to me, was really the potential, like the potential at what we call emptiness, that from this moment on, there's such an unlimited capacity for good, in ourselves and in all others. And so that's what Yangtze Rinpoche was talking about, this combination of somehow totally accepting everything you are right now and everything in the world right now. There's a lot of awful things going on in the world right now. And you see people just railing against it and feeling a lot of despair. But if we're honest with ourselves, there's no other way that things could be except the way that they happened right up till the last second. And it doesn't mean that you say that they're right, but they did happen. Things within ourselves and things within our world and things with the wars going on and so on. Tara Brach talks about this. She's a wonderful practitioner, more in the insight tradition. I think some people know who Tara Brach is, right? She has the #1 Buddhist podcast, Tara Brach. And she made an audiobook called Radical Self-Acceptance, which really greatly transformed my life, and I think many other people's. And she says the same thing, that for you to truly grow, you first have to completely accept yourself as you are, like without self-hatred, self-criticism. Like those are really poisonous, toxic emotions to be in opposition to yourself, to be disliking yourself. And so in thinking about this question about where renunciation fits in on the Buddhist path, I came to a tentative conclusion myself. And I also talked to a couple of teachers. Has Lauren Ladner ever taught here? I don't know. He's a wonderful psychologist. He's probably like the root disciple of Gyumid Khensa Rinpoche. If you know him, a wonderful teacher. He wrote a great book called The Lost Art of Compassion. And also Venerable Sangye Khadro, I think some of you know. So I talked to both of them about this. Where does self-compassion fit on the path? And they both agreed that self-compassion really fits in with the topic of renunciation. And that, I think, maybe fits more into the ambition side of the picture that we're talking about, that once you're ready for it, how to change ourselves for the better. And that once you're ready for it is really important, because I think as Buddhists, or as any kind of person trying to pursue any kind of path of genuine self-improvement, if you come at the improvement parts before the self-acceptance parts, it can kind of poison or taint the experiences of growth, because you come at it without that gentleness toward yourself, I think, that we really need. So, like a lot of Buddhist terms, renunciation is defined as a negation of what it isn't. I think you're used to all these Buddhist definitions defining things by what they aren't. Renunciation isn't attachment. It's not anger. It's not self-centered ignorance. But what is renunciation if you state it in positive terms? It just sounds like giving things up, right? Another translation that a number of people use, Venerable Sangye Khadro uses, is the determination to be free. Has anyone heard that translation for renunciation? Yeah. And so I like this term, to be free, the determination to be free, because when you say, I want to be free, or now I'm finally free, it doesn't feel like you're giving something up. It feels like you're getting something, right? When you say, I'm finally free. And I think that's that sense of freedom, is getting something. So renunciation really is obtaining something. We talk about it as cultivating the causes of happiness, letting go of the causes of suffering. And I think one of the best other phrases for this determination to be free, renunciation, is self-compassion. Because it's at this stage that you're finally creating the true causes of happiness for yourself, and then by the cascade for everyone around you. So in the book, How to Train a Happy Mind, that I just released, I titled this chapter for this topic, The Red Pill of Renunciation. And that's because I think, anyone writing on a a book about Buddhism has to bring up the Matrix at some point in the book. And the funny thing about that movie is you can actually seemingly bring up the Matrix in almost every topic of the lamrim, actually, which is kind of amazing. And so people often bring up the Matrix in light of emptiness, like the true nature of reality and then the illusion imposed upon us. But I really like talking about renunciation in the context of the Matrix. So I think you've heard this quote. I have this quote from the Matrix where Morpheus tells Neo, "Everything about the world you live in is a lie, a collective delusion that somehow exists only in your mind." How many people have seen the Matrix? Okay, good. Yeah, a lot of people. Almost everybody. A lot of younger people haven't. So in the book, I have to. It's already 20 years. Oh no, more than 20 years old, like 25 years old. So you have to actually summarize it now. But anyway, Morpheus gives Neo this choice of taking a red pill that will reveal reality as it is, or a blue pill that will leave him in his self-deception. And that's a metaphor. There's a lot of ways to interpret that metaphor. In the context of this talk, I'd like to talk about that metaphor as continuing to blame our suffering on external events that are imposed upon us. Like a lot of us feel, I think, every day reading the news. Or face, the Buddhist view, which is that the true sources of our suffering are our delusions of attachment, anger, and ignorance, which is a challenge. I think, I certainly forget that at times every single day. But when our minds are in a balanced place, we realize that renunciation really means turning inward toward the mind for a stable sense of happiness that's independent of our circumstances. So when you get to renunciation on the path, it really is a choice. It's quite a challenging point in the path if you really take it seriously, I think. Like when you ask yourself honestly, do you believe that happiness comes from outside yourself, right? From sense pleasures, from relationships, experiences, which of course, like some portion of happiness does come from. Or does the happiness primarily stem from within your own mind? And we have many kind of Buddhist logical arguments for this, because you can be at the fanciest restaurant in the world, but if you're arguing with your partner through the meal, it doesn't taste very good, right? And you can be like incredibly poor, but if you're content with your life and your relationships and so on, you can be quite happy. You see it in all the billionaires. I've actually known a couple of billionaires. I worked with Paul Allen. I worked with Mark Zuckerberg, and you read about more. And what you see from billionaires is maybe a smaller percentage of billionaires are truly happy than the percentage of people in poverty, even. Not to say that people deserve to be in poverty or should remain in poverty, but it shows you can have everything in the world and be miserable. So this perspective, what I learned about trying to adapt the lamrim to a secular perspective is that it's actually the earlier stages of the lamrim that required the most adaptation. In fact, it's the very first topic of the precious life that was the hardest to adapt, because that first topic in the first sentence talks about karma, other realms, past and future lives. But as you get to the more advanced topics of lamrim, they need really almost no adaptation, which is kind of interesting. And it also makes you think maybe the earlier topics on the lamrim are the ones that are more like culturally adapted to each culture, and each civilization as Buddhism evolves. So renunciation doesn't require any supernatural belief. Right? When you study this topic, there's nothing in it really that requires believing something outside what we ordinarily believe in our culture. But it is a specific Buddhist view. I was just in Los Angeles visiting my uncle, and he and I always go out to dinner. He really enjoys delicious meals and glass. I've never seen someone enjoy a glass of wine as much as he does. like, it's amazing how much he enjoys about a glass of wine. And I'm kind of jealous sometimes. I feel like, wow, I've never enjoyed a glass of wine as much as he seems to enjoy every single one. And I used to think of him a little bit as someone who's content with like a life of external pleasure. Um, but then I started thinking a little bit about my uncle, and I think when you look at people like him, you often see that their happiness actually comes from somewhere other than their possessions. And so my uncle's life is really interesting because he had a very difficult childhood. He had an abusive father, and then as an adult, he chose to take on a life where his job was helping people traumatized by crimes and disasters survive their experience. So he chose for his job to always be in the most difficult situation. He worked in emergency rooms for 10 years, helping people, dealing with death and trauma. He worked with the LAPD, the police department, for 10 years. He worked with the emergency services in Los Angeles. Whenever there was a giant disaster in LA, he'd be the first person there to help people. And so when I think about my uncle and my relationship to him, I kind of think that he learned about the lamrim in a lot of ways. Those earlier topics like how precious life is, impermanence, cause and effect, suffering, like having realizations of these topics isn't limited to Buddhists. And I think my uncle had those realizations on the job, as a psychologist instead of in a Buddhist center. I don't know if any of you ever heard this. There's this quote by Dostoevsky. He once said, I wanted to share it. He said, "The best way to keep a prisoner from escaping is to make sure he never knows he's in prison." Which kind of relates to the Matrix. And so another way to think about renunciation is this breaking out of the prison of our delusions. So starting with an honest appraisal of our minds right now, and seeing, like, at least like me, that we have moments of frustration, of anger, impatience, craving, and that we'd rather be free from those. Something I've noticed in some moments of clarity is that, like, if you really notice when you really, really want something, you really have that craving, and you finally get it. I don't know if any of you have had this feeling, but I've noticed that if I'm really honest with myself, like really self-aware, the reason I feel good after getting the thing I wanted for so long is actually that I'm free from that attachment for a little while. It's actually, try yourself the next time you get something like you really, really want, whether it's like food or a sensual experience or a reputation, whatever it is. But look at your mind when it happens. And when I've done that, I realized, like, wait a minute, I think it's actually because I'm free from the craving for a little bit. It's not actually because I got the thing. And so I think that's part of renunciation, is that wisdom of realizing what really are the causes of happiness and the causes of suffering. So they say, I mean, I think most of you have studied the lamrim, so you know renunciation is this turning point where you start to open up to a more reliable, stable way to be happy and to make the most of our precious lives. That first lamrim topic. I leave out guru devotion as the first lamrim topic because we study it that way. But for someone who's not a Buddhist, of course, like that doesn't make sense as the first topic. And if you look at others, like if you look at The Easy Path, have any of you seen that book, The Easy Path? It's a wonderful lamrim book, and in that version of the lamrim, it also begins with a precious life, which makes sense for people who don't have a guru. So I want to get a little more into what is renunciation. Have any of you read this book, The Gelug Kagyu Tradition of Mahamudra by Alex Burtson? Oh, good, then maybe some people haven't heard this quote. This is one of my favorite books. And a lot of my time I just spent reading the introduction. His introduction is very, very pithy and wise about the whole Buddhist path. And so there are these 2 pages about renunciation in that book that I've read over and over and over again. And I wanted to read this one paragraph from it because it really affected me when I was trying to understand this topic. So he says, once we reach the stage of renunciation, we're willing to sacrifice something. This does not refer to foregoing something trivial, like television or ice cream, or giving up something not at all trivial, like making love with our marriage partner, or even relaxing and having fun. We need to let go of our problems and all levels of their causes. And so that's something that I often reflect on that as I try to understand renunciation. That what I really need to renounce are my delusions. Like those delusions are really self-destructive, like self-destructive aspects of our own personalities. And those are the self-centered delusion of attachment, anger, ignorance, and those are really the things that cause us to suffer. And then they um, ramify. There's this beautiful word ramify, which is kind of like what a river does as it spreads out and divides into little like rivulets. They ramify into other disturbing mental states like anxiety, addiction, depression. Like the Buddhist view is everything's rooted in those three basic delusions, the three poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance. So from the perspective of renunciation, those delusions are what we need to let go of to find true happiness. That you don't need to let go of relationships, wealth, even sex or ice cream, which sounds good to people. They're like, wow, I can practice Buddhism, still have fun. But of course, letting go of our delusions is maybe even harder than letting go of those the physical things that we rush toward to try and satisfy them. And I like to mention that the path takes a turn here because up to this point, the idea of meditation as a kind of treatment for day-to-day problems does make sense. Like the way people use meditation in therapeutic settings today, right? Like many mindfulness programs, many apps, they use meditation like a therapy. Like you have this problem and try this meditation. Like you can't sleep, try this meditation. Or you're feeling stressful, try this meditation. You feel anxiety, try this meditation. The challenge with that approach to meditation is that if the meditation helps you overcome that problem, then just like taking a pill for an illness, you might then stop the meditation after you get over, sleeplessness, anxiety, and so on. And so this is the point where um, you really take a turn towards permanently turning away from the causes of suffering in your life and towards the true causes of happiness. So renunciation is wishing to be free from suffering. But as each of us know, we easily forget what is suffering and we start to externalize our problems, like especially if you have a partner. Isn't it funny? Like the person who we love the most, who loves us the most, we externalize our problems onto them. I'm sure everyone who has had a partner understands this. Or onto your family, your boss, politicians. It takes a constant reminder in meditation, even for highly realized beings, to stop externalizing our problems on the people close to us and the people we see constantly in the news and so on. I'll tell you, it requires a very forceful kind of reminder to myself all the time. I got this from Elaine Jackson. I don't know if anyone knows Elaine Jackson, she's the one of the founders of Vajrapani Institute, wonderful teacher. But she taught me this meditation, and I constantly do whenever I start to feel a little irritated at my wife, is that you remind yourself. So whatever it is, I mean, there's such trivial things, you get upset at your partner for. But then when those things happen, I remind myself, but she loves me more than anyone else in the world. And she's my best friend. Right? Like that's true. I think for all of us who have or have had a partner, like that's true. When you're together, you're your best friends. You love each other more than anyone in the world. And then it's so self-destructive to start externalizing your own delusions, your own problems onto that other person, blaming your own delusions on the person who loves you and cares about you the most. And I say this only from my own experience, but I have a feeling it resonates with a lot of other people. So I think the thing we learned, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, is how much constant repetition we need to cultivate any of the topics, and particularly renunciation. And if there's any doubt about that, you can look at Lama Zopa. There are these stories about Venerable Roger who would interrupt. I don't know if anyone has heard these stories, because Venerable Roger, Lama Zopa's attendant, because Lama Zopa would sometimes just be deep in meditation and about to miss a flight or something like that. And so Roger would say, "What are you meditating on?" And it was almost always very early in the lamrim. Like Rinpoche would say, "Oh, the precious life, or suffering." He's not meditating on a seemingly very advanced topic. It's his very early stages of the lamrim. And my teacher, Venerable René, is always telling us that story. He's coming soon for a retreat, a very really special treat. And I think it's a huge reminder. If Pamasopa Rinpoche needs to meditate on, precious life, suffering, renunciation, then we certainly do constantly. But if you can find the little shortcut for yourself that works, like that was the one. Because I think the negative meditations are often quite ineffective for Westerners, because we're already so a bit negative on ourselves. So I often try to find a way, like the 10 non-virtues, I try to find like the 10 virtues, that you want to practice. So thinking of your partner, not like, oh, I don't want to be angry at my partner, but think, she loves me more than anyone in the world. She's my best friend. Like that's the mantra. Like, I keep saying that mantra over and over again. And gradually that it just shows the weakness and the wrongness of the delusion. Like the tiny little thing I'm upset at her about, that is totally my own projection, pales in comparison to that lifelong devotion she has to me. Anyway, but as I was saying about my uncle, that meditation isn't the only way to get in touch with suffering. I do like to say, it isn't only, there are other paths besides, the Dharma that we have, which is so extraordinary. For a lot of people, reading the news can really ruin your day. I don't know how many people feel that. I certainly know a lot of people who aren't Buddhists. It just causes them to tear out their hair. But if you can read the news with compassion, it can be a very, very good way to connect with suffering. Thinking about compassion rather than anger or despair. On my retreat, like I said, I did this 1-month retreat in January. At the end of it, in some ways, I was so happy to be away from the news and any other type of stimulation. At the end of it, I realized I did kind of miss the news for that reason. That to see like the deepest forms of suffering going on in the world, and to use that as an engine for compassion in a life that, a lot of us, our lives are quite comfortable. So it's a good reminder of the suffering going on in the world if you can keep the compassion in your heart. To take this to a slightly lighter note, I also think comedians can be really great teachers of the Dharma. I think the thing about comedy, it's a bit of a trap to try to define what comedy is. But in a lot of ways, comedy is emptiness. Comedy is showing you that there's always another way to look at a situation, very different, a funny way to look at something awful. I don't know if anyone saw this Jerry Seinfeld special on Netflix. It was called 23 Hours to Kill. I'm not sure if anybody saw it. It doesn't matter if you did, but I was really, really delighted to see this routine, because from my perspective, the whole routine was on the suffering of change, which is kind of a harder suffering to understand. Like we were talking about, the suffering of pleasures, like what is it that really feels good when you get your pleasure? And so he does this incredible long riff on the suffering of change. And he used the example of the suffering the audience went through just to get to his show. So he says, like, when we're at home, all we're thinking about is when we're going to leave. Right? You're like, when are we going to leave? When are we going to leave? When are we going to leave? And he does it a lot better than I do. So you can go, if you subscribe to Netflix, you can go watch this later. Then he says, when we're on the way there, all we want is to arrive. Then once we get there, all we can talk about is when we need to go home. And so he climaxes the routine. I love this, and this I want to directly quote him. And he says, nobody wants to be anywhere. Nobody likes anything. We're cranky, we're irritable, and we're dealing with it by constantly changing locations. So in the book, I actually say, like, I don't even think the Dalai Lama could have given a better explanation of how our attachment can ruin an otherwise pleasurable experience. And I'll tell you, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, wrote an introduction to my book. So his office went through the whole book, and he didn't flag that part. He actually seemed to agree that Seinfeld was a good teacher on the suffering of change. So that first form of suffering, the suffering of suffering, is more obvious to us: sickness, aging, not getting what we want. I think that one is such a long list of sufferings we get, but that's one I think about a lot, like not getting what we want, getting what we don't want. Those two forms of sufferings are like the routine ones every day. But the way Seinfeld talks about how going out to dinner, watching TV, seeing friends, those are all also unsatisfactory to us if we approach them with this craving, dissatisfied mind. I mean, Jerry Seinfeld didn't go to that level in his teaching. So it does help to add the Dharma onto it a bit. But at least the funniness of it helps you to kind of shake you out of your kind of self-absorption. So, we learn in Buddhism, no external thing can please us permanently, right? That's the basis of the suffering of change. Objects wear out and change. So do people and experiences. We exaggerate how much we think we'll like something or someone, and then we get disappointed when we discover that it inevitably has flaws. Yeah.
Internal thing can bring us real happiness?
No internal thing. So the question is, don't we also learn that no internal thing can bring us happiness? Well, I don't know about that. I think one of the things that we're taught, and you might have experienced yourself in meditation, is when you start to connect with your better nature. What they call Buddha nature in Buddhism. I like the term fundamental goodness, which is a kind of a less Buddhist way. The Buddha didn't call it Buddha nature. That would have been quite egotistic for him to say that. But are you a long-term Buddhist, or yeah, you're Buddha? Yeah. Okay. So. So
you think good nature is internal?
Well, what do you mean by internal then? I mean, maybe, okay, you're getting really deep really fast, right? So you're saying, do you think Buddha nature is internal? Yeah. 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 So that's this phase of the lamrim. So the lamrim is very dualistic until you get to later stages, deliberately so, right? So when you talk about the topic of renunciation, you talk about very concretely about ignorance, attachment, aversion, like as if these are all solid opposites, right? Like the dualistic way of thinking is quite important to Buddhism, especially in the earliest topics of the lamrim. And then in the later topics, when you get into topics of love, compassion, and emptiness, then you start to dissolve those dualities, right? That makes sense. So if you continue though with your first question of whether something internal is satisfying, from the perspective of Buddha nature, yes, there is. If you can get in touch with the fundamental goodness of your mind, if you've done like a Mahamudra meditation, have you done the meditations on nature of the mind and so this type of meditations? Yeah.
For me, the path is not goodness.
Yeah.
The mind is not good.
Yeah.
The mind just is what it is.
Yeah.
And what arises is not happiness. I would call it bliss.
Yeah, yeah.
But I wouldn't say that bliss is the same thing as happiness.
I think you're right from a more precise definition. The thing is, they're very precise. It's like sukha, right? Is the term is like bliss, right? We don't have as precise words in English. So we do tend to use the word happiness, which has a little bit of a shallower connotation.
Well, it's the
in,
dual, I mean,
yeah.
it's dualism between happiness and sadness.
Yeah,
It's a
but
dualism.
again, like
Yeah.
if I think let's do this in like a really deep way, right? So if you want to think of the highest level of highest approach to interdependence or emptiness, is the Madhyamika view, right? So in that view, what it says is that I'll give you a quote from Geshe Nawang Sonam, who was the person who reviewed my book and corrected some parts of it, which was very, very kind of him. And so what he says about the conventional reality and ultimate reality, which is what you're talking about, right? Conventional reality is the reality of appearances, where they appear to be good and bad and red and blue and suffering and happiness, if you want to use those words,
Sadness, yeah.
right? So from the Madhyamika view, which is our view, that's the view of our school, most of us listening right now, he said, and many other texts you can find statements like this, that there's really the conventional reality is not wrong. It's just that it's more like looking at a tree from far away or up close. The view of the ultimate reality of total interdependence versus the conventional reality of dualities. Conventional reality isn't wrong. It's just another way of viewing things. And that's where the Madhyamaka view is very different from other schools of Buddhism's view of emptiness. So what you're saying is correct, but you just have to decide what view you're looking at. Almost everything in the lamrim is dualistic up to the point of emptiness, right? And even the lower schools of emptiness are a little bit dualistic because they find a basis for reality. They find a basis in the mind, they find a basis in atoms, so on, right? Only the Madhyamaka view finds no basis at all. So yes, things are essencelessness. Of course, there's no duality between yourself and others, or between suffering and non-suffering. But that's not this stage of the lamrim, right? This stage of the lamrim is much more dualistic for the purpose of leading you, further along the path. Does that make sense?
Not completely, but I understand your point that you can, I mean, if we're lit, if we're just ensconced in a dualistic world and in the dualistic language, and we want to talk about Buddhism, then we're going to talk in, dualism.
But there's nothing wrong with dual. That's the bigger realization. There's nothing wrong with dualism. It's just you have to have dualities in order to contemplate the emptiness of the duality. They're not separate. They're not separate from one another, right? There's no reason to rail against like the word happiness or the word suffering or the words inside and outside, interior and exterior. You can see how those things are true to a certain extent, and you can also see how they're false to an ultimate extent. Both things are true. Like one's not absolutely false and the other absolutely true. They're just continuums of conventional ultimate reality, right?
That's what I try and renounce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's renouncing ignorance, right?
Right.
So there's renouncing anger, renouncing attachment. I kind of am light on renouncing ignorance in the topic because in the book, which is more the approach I'm taking here, because that comes more towards the later stage of the path. But that's the last renunciation, obviously, is renouncing, dualistic ignorance, separation between yourself and anything else. But in this phase, you feel separate from yourself. Like that's the thing. At this stage in the lamrim, like it's way worse than feeling separate than others. You don't even feel connected to yourself until you really have renunciation, right? Like that self-compassion is to actually feel connected to yourself, to really love yourself, to really embrace yourself for everything you are, and also acknowledge the way things aren't quite going well for yourself, the directions that you aren't quite steering the right path in your life. And without being hard on yourself or judgmental or feeling guilty, gently steering yourself in a more constructive direction.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess, for me, part of the problem is I really don't want to be happy. I don't want to suffer either.
Yeah.
What I really want is this bliss.
Yeah.
Which is different from happiness.
Yeah.
It's just a different animal. So your mission to achieve or create or make happiness happen. It's like I'm going, wait,
I know.
happiness is good, but if you're happy, then it seems like you're gonna be sad as well. And it's just a different thing than a selfless awareness, which weirdly enough is blissful.
Yeah. Well, words are very, very important. Sometimes they say, sticks and stones and break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That couldn't be a more false statement. Words are the most painful things, are the most powerful things. So let's talk about happiness for a minute, right? We hear the word happiness all through the Buddhist path. Any of us who are meditators, probably every morning we think, may all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. I assume you do a similar meditation every day. You can't be thinking like that's a bad thing to wish people happiness, or maybe you do. I don't know. What do you think?
Wishing people happiness is cool. Spreading bliss is a lot more direct and catching. It spreads around like a disease or something.
Yeah.
And people seem happy, and they probably would say they were happy to get a dose of that, but I think it's something else.
Yeah. Well, almost every word we use in English maps incompletely to the Sanskrit, Tibetan, Pali term. So when you say happiness in Buddhism, I would tend to suggest you overlap it with the term contentment, satisfaction, which I think get a little bit closer to the sense of like ease and meaning and purpose and joy and bliss. You feel like, I think the way you are using the word happiness is maybe a short-lived experience of pleasure or a diluted, exaggerated sense of excitement or something like that.
Something like I'm good, and life is good, and pain is in abeyance. But personally, I do not want content. That's the last thing. And I forgot what the other word. Satisfaction. I do not want satisfaction. Oh.
Well, I'm glad there's some word that works for you. Everybody has something, right? Bliss is a good one. It's a little bit of an insider word for those of us in like Vajrayana Buddhism, which is cool. We don't talk about this. But I think that's one. But really, we actually are saying the same thing, right? Like a durable, a durable sense that life is meaningful and purposeful. And I mean, I'm sure you have a way of defining it for yourself. But certainly, we're not trying to say that the solution to life is to delude yourself into some short-term sense of temporary happiness. That's not the purpose of this lecture. But thanks for it. That's a great discussion. It would be kind of fun just to have the discussion with you the whole time. Anyway, should I keep talking about renunciation? I guess we are. So.
I'm gonna chip in.
Sorry. Yeah.
Hi there. I'm on Zoom. I'm gonna chip in that when I think of happiness, and my wish for others is they recognize their Buddha nature, because to me that's the ultimate goal of what we're doing.
Yeah.
And that's how I translate it in my head.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't really a happiness that's only within yourself, like His Holiness says, by all means be selfish, but be intelligently selfish. Real happiness comes from cherishing others. Compassion is a path to genuine happiness. I mean, he uses the word, many other Buddhist teachers, including His Holiness, use the word happiness quite often, and they use it in this big tented sense of happiness. You really can't be happiness all by yourself in Mahayana Buddhism. And other forms of Buddhism, they do see a path that way. But we don't really see it possible to be genuinely happy without considering the welfare of all beings. Just because it's logical. How can you be happy when others are suffering? There's this, I don't know if any of you have read Kim Stanley Robinson. He's a great science fiction author. He wrote this book called The Ministry for the Future, which is about the climate change. But he wrote a beautiful thing in one of his books called The Years of Rice and Salt, where he said, until every person, I'll have to paraphrase it. He said, until every person on earth has, food, shelter, clothing, dignity, respect, then civilization hasn't even begun. We are not even a civilization yet until everybody has, those basic needs, those basic dignities. And so I agree with you. I think those sort of feelings are the Mahayana Buddhist, the basics. That's why you do that at the very beginning of your practice. So whatever you're practicing, whether it's, even if it's on the earlier stages of the lamrim, is infused with the love and compassion. Anyway, but yeah, I agree with that Buddha nature, seeing the best in everybody. And it's quite logical. It's really quite logical. Everyone wants to be happy. No one wants to be suffer. When you really look at people's, you don't want to be happy. Everyone except, what's your name? What's your name? Mark. Everyone except Mark wants to be happy. No one wants to suffer. You know what I mean by happiness. Where was I? Let's see. I wanted to lead a meditation too tonight, though. Does people still want to do a meditation? Yeah. Okay. So I'll leave some time for that. Let's see. What was I going to talk about here? I'm going to skip a couple things because we had that nice conversation. Oh yeah, this was kind of a cool part. Yeah, people are familiar with the 8 worldly concerns. These. I was asked to lead a meditation retreat at the Vajrapani Institute on the 8 worldly concerns, and I accepted it because I like to joke that I'm an expert on that topic. If you know what I mean. So the first time I heard this, right? Seeking gain, avoiding loss. Seeking pleasure, avoiding pain. Seeking praise, avoiding blame. Seeking fame, avoiding disgrace. Still, even reading those right now is kind of shocking because I think, wait, what else is there? Really, what else is there in life? That pretty much sums up all of life, at least, for most of us. And in some Buddhist traditions, you actually do give those things up. You actually do try to give those things up for real. But in Mahayana Buddhism, it's more a question of how you engage in those opposites, those dualities that we're talking about, your motivation. And this is actually a problem with, I think, a number of Buddhist programs that leapfrog renunciation, and they go straight to the more advanced topics of love, compassion, emptiness, straight to emptiness. But according to the lamrim, those advanced practices, they become biased and even selfish activities if we don't first develop renunciation. I want to say something kind of sensitive about that. Lorne Ladner, I love that Lorne Ladner, he says a lot of wonderful things. But when I interviewed him on my podcast, he put this really powerfully. He said, fake compassion is narcissism. Which is very, 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 very powerful to hear. And I think we've all felt that. I've certainly felt that. There is a sense in Buddhism like fake it till you make it. You want to, but it's a fine edge. It's a really fine razor's edge. Because yes, you want to be trying, you want to be acting compassionate, but you don't want to be performing compassion, right? You don't want to be having this kind of performance of compassion when inside, it's driven by your ego. And yeah, I think that's all I'll say about that. I think renunciation is really scary, and you start to ask, what's the alternative? I don't know if all of you have struggled, but I certainly struggled with this topic over the years, kind of thinking if there's a way out of it. Is there some way that I can avoid this step of the path? But is there some alternative? And honestly, I can't think of any answer except self-deception, like we're talking about. Fake compassion is narcissism. If you saw The Matrix, there's a character, Cypher, in The Matrix, who asks for his memory to be, I don't know if you remember, he asks for his memory to be wiped and to return to the simulated pleasures of wine, steak, sex, even though he knows they're simulations. And I think that's a very good metaphor, for what happens if you don't have renunciation. And I'll tell you just personally, from my perspective, my biggest attachment in life is my wife. And that attachment has caused me a lot of grief. It's so sad. Like I was saying, the person who loves me the most, who's my best friend. And when I meditated on renunciation, I realized that I had such a big list of expectations of her, about how much time she spent with me, about how much affection she showed, about how much attention, whatever, about how to do the dishes, all kinds of silly things. And when she didn't meet them, I'd sometimes get angry and make our relationship worse. I won't ask you to raise your hand if that's happened to you, because I would guess it's happened to almost everybody. But then on the other hand, honestly, for years, it's really scared me thinking what our relationship would be like without attachment. Honestly, I think I had a fear that our relationship might just dissolve without the strong feelings of desire, that I had for her. And it was also during this retreat in January, that I had this realization. Again, the realizations sound really trite when you just say them out loud. But during that realization, I really had this feeling, like I felt it, rather than just thinking it, that my only enemies really are my attachment, anger, and self-centeredness. And that anger really is rooted in attachment. Like Venerable Bina talks about this a lot. Anger is when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So in Buddhism, it's nice we're talking about definitions. In Buddhism, love has this very simple definition, which is wanting someone to be happy. It's such a beautiful, simple definition. And it really opens you up to loving everybody, because it doesn't mean you have to think they're a great person. That's why people have trouble loving whatever political leader you don't like, because they think you have to be a great person. But to love someone, you just need to want them to be happy and think that they deserve to be happy, just like everyone else. Sorry for using the word happy. Be blissful. But being free from, to get back to the thing about my wife, but genuinely feeling that freedom from attachment, at least for a little bit, that's honestly plagued me for most of my life, all of a sudden, I saw more clearly what she needed. That's the thing. If you're free from your attachment, you're more able to love, like genuine Buddhist love, wanting someone to be happy. What I realized is she needed a lot of space to herself. I hope she's not going to watch this, because she always gets kind of embarrassed when I talk about her. But, that's like the biggest, for most of us in a relationship, that's the biggest kind of engine of our practice. So I realized she needs little things like just letting her be when she seems inward, something that simple. Appreciating all the beauty and the generosity and the dignity and how she lives her life. But I also realized some big things, like I wake up, like a lot of you, I wake up really early in the morning to meditate, and my wife's a really light sleeper. So when I woke up early in the morning, I was always waking her up, and that chronic lack of sleep was really harming her. So I decided to make a big change in our life, which was that for that meditation retreat, I was sleeping up in a meditation room, like a little bit more yogi lifestyle. So I decided to keep that lifestyle and let her just sleep herself and be able to have a good night's sleep. That to just create a little more space between us, so that she could simply sleep well. So in a lot of ways, like recently, over this year after that retreat, we radically changed our life together, and it's made our relationship like so much more beautiful. In a lot of ways, almost like when we first met, but without that agitation of that extreme craving you have, when you're first in a relationship. So I don't know. They say you can realize the lamrim top. I think we're very scared of the word realizations as Buddhists because we have a very high bar for it. But they say you can gain the lamrim realizations, in a week or a month, or, short amounts of time if you really put a lot of time into it. Not bodhicitta, not emptiness, obviously. But things like suffering and preciousness of life, they say you can realize them quickly. And I bet a lot of people listening have had those experiences. You can lose it too, it's not always a permanent realization. But I just wanted to share this because, really kind of finally, after however, I don't know, 15 years with my wife, really for the first time, I think, felt some sense of non-attachment. And it really, it made me realize I didn't have anything to fear. Like the relationship really got better, to think more of her welfare than mine, and to give up, all the things that I thought I needed to be happy, that, I wanted from her. So I just wanted to share that a little bit because it's a really lovely feeling, thinking that you don't need something from your partner to be happy, to truly love your partner, according to that Buddhist definition of wanting someone to be happy. And the paradox is it's actually made our relationship much, much better. And our house is really filled with a lot of warmth and care that wasn't always there before. So they say it takes courage at this stage on the path. I think it really did. It took me a very long time, despite reading the books and reading those pages over and over again. It's strange, what is it that eventually makes you kind of wake up to something that's relatively obvious in just a few words on the page, but every once in a while it sinks in, that the causes of our suffering are anger, attachment, ignorance, self-centeredness, however you want to describe that. But anyway, from my own imperfect example, and especially those of our teachers like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, like I was talking about, you can see that renunciation is this topic where the rubber meets the road on the path, and we start for the first time to really care for ourselves wisely. Like, look, even me as supposed long-time practitioner, like tens of thousands of hours of practice, has kind of surprised me how long it took to get some basic understanding of renunciation, with respect to my wife and relationship. But that's the point where you first start to really care for yourself wisely and let go of those constant causes of suffering, to embrace like the uncertain, impermanent beauty of reality as it is, without any preconceptions and without any demands. So that's one way to think about renunciation. So yeah, I think we have time if we want to do a meditation, and then maybe have time for a couple more questions if we do. Yeah, sounds good. Okay, so settle yourself into meditation posture. I think everybody here knows what that is. Particularly straightening your spine is helpful. Instead of motivation for the meditation, that this practice bring the causes of happiness, bliss for ourselves, for everyone close to us, for everyone in the world, and even people we abhor. Bring your mind to your breath just for a couple of breaths to settle the mind. In our tradition, meditating on renunciation means two things. Understanding how the causes of suffering lie in your delusions of attachment, anger, and ignorance. And then turning away from craving and blaming things outside ourselves to find a reliable source of refuge within your own mind. We can also call renunciation the determination to be free or self-compassion. So first reflect on life's unmistakable difficulties, pain, poverty, homelessness, sickness, violence, abuse, exploitation, conflict, loneliness, aging, death. Think also about how even when we're free from ordinary suffering, we can still feel dissatisfied with life's pleasures because relationships, objects, and experiences don't last. They wear out. They otherwise come to an end. Then your mind can also change. Try to remember a time when you stopped enjoying something you'd enjoyed only days before. An activity, a person, food, or work. Sometimes simply from getting too much of it. And then also remember that we'll all eventually meet our death and lose everything, which is a fate that none of us can avoid. So though there's no way to rid yourself of life's difficult experiences, there is a way to be free from the mental side of suffering. So see if you can honestly appraise your own mind right now by looking at your delusions. And with each, we'll try and understand better how it causes suffering and how its way of seeing is exaggerated. So attachment is a delusion that exaggerates the positive in whatever we desire. Imagine something specific that you feel a strong attachment to, a person, a thing, an achievement. So is your mind biased in how it sees that person or thing? Do you ignore the drawbacks of what you want? For a moment, think of all the ways in which your object of attachment is flawed. Is it perfect? Or does it come with its own problems? Will it truly bring lasting happiness on its own. Then bring to mind an object of your anger, which is usually a person. It can be someone from your everyday life, or someone famous, like a politician. Notice how anger exaggerates that person's negative qualities, how hard it is to see any good in them. Try to recognize that many people love this person, relatives, friends, admirers. And try to see how this person's actions may benefit many other people too. Then look at ignorance, the root of the other delusions. Do you exaggerate your own problems and minimize those of others? Do you believe that you're a little bit more important, just a little bit more important than everyone else? What would it be like to see every person as equally deserving of happiness, health, security, and wealth? Even though you might logically believe this, try for a moment to truly feel it. Imagine the mental peace that comes from feeling that others are equally important to you, even your enemies. Consider whether you're ready to let go of the delusions that cause you to suffer. Do you have the courage to admit that external pleasures, relationships, and achievements aren't the ultimate sources of happiness? Is it possible to walk that tightrope of being fully engaged in life without feeling addicted to some people and things and repulsed by others? Seeking pleasure, avoiding pain. Seeking gain, avoiding loss. Seeking praise, avoiding blame. Seeking fame, avoiding disgrace. Imagine not running away from these, but renouncing their hold on you. Imagine using life's impermanent pleasures and pains only to deepen your connections to others and to do good in the world. Renunciation doesn't mean that you have to let go of your goals, relationships, possessions, or pleasures. But are you ready to let go of believing that they are the source of your happiness and irritation? Are you ready to commit to an inward journey of discovery, to understand how your mind really works and what your mind truly is? Could happiness be as simple as accepting and then gently letting go of those troubling aspects of your personality, like worry and anxiety, to discover a happier, more stable way to live? Is it possible that we each have within us a profound well of warmth, stability, goodness, and satisfaction that doesn't rely on anything outside ourselves? See if you can touch that part of your mind right now. Start by taking a couple of breaths and giving them all your attention. Now, let anything at all appear in your mind. Let thoughts arise and disappear on their own without getting attached to them or annoyed by them. Watch your thoughts from a distance while letting your mind stay at peace. Then see if you can explore a subtler level of awareness. When the mind looks beneath thoughts to awareness itself, what does it see? Without any expectations, watch quietly for a moment, the mind looking at the mind. And you may find that the corners of your mouth tip up into a smile as you find a stable, unending source of happiness deep within yourself. And then we can aspire that any insights we might have gained from this short meditation might enable us to better understand the delusions that cause our dissatisfaction, and dedicate ourselves to seeing the drawbacks and benefits of objects, people, relationships, and experiences more clearly than before. We can set an intention to carry the good habits we build in meditation into our day, so that they change how we see people and experiences and how we react. We can determine to remain in control of our minds so that we can choose how to respond to life's urges, following them if they're beneficial, or when they aren't, allowing them to melt back into the open spaciousness of a more subtle mind that's always there for us as a refuge. And then we can come out of meditation. And so that touches on your question too about, finding something within your mind, finding refuge within your own mind. One way of looking at that is touching that fundamental goodness, Buddha nature, they call it in Buddhism. It's one of the most powerful, optimistic ideas of Buddhism is that the delusions are very shallow, that they're actually not at our core. And if you just can dive beneath them, like we, maybe just did in meditation, that's always there waiting for you, is a more stable sense of calm, happiness, bliss, satisfaction, whatever we want to call it. So yeah, any questions? We have a little bit of time. Yeah, Nina.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for the talk, and thank you for the beautiful meditation. Now I'm just contemplating a little bit this connection between self-compassion and renunciation, and wondering, I understand the notion that it's the same in a way, that it's an act of self-compassion to want to be rid of our negative emotions and our ignorance. And that leads us ultimately to happiness while benefiting others as well. So it is definitely an act of self-compassion. I am just wondering though, whether there are some techniques or some ways that you could recommend for this step before renunciation, because my feeling is that there's some danger for many of us Westerners. You mentioned it yourself, that we do have a habit of being very harsh with ourselves and being not negotiating this connection or this balance between ambition and contentment, very gently and very lovingly, but rather being in perpetual kind of over-ambitious non-contentment, so to speak. And I'm just wondering if we, think about renunciation and don't have some level of self-compassion, whether it's not yet another opportunity to go on a trip of bad ignorance, bad me and poor me and terrible, it's all my fault, these are my emotions, my anger and all these kind of things, which is true when you look at it gently and softly, and you can use it for your path, but it could also, from the other angle, be used to perpetuate our lack in self-compassion. Yeah. I'm just wondering what your thoughts were about it.
Yeah. So, the whole reason I got invited to start teaching meditation like 18 years ago, and I still don't consider myself a teacher. I consider myself a teaching assistant. I think that's like the best title I found for myself. But in trying to because if many of the people that come to meditations are totally new to Buddhism. So what I've found as the lead up to help people better like be ready for renunciation or just for life in general is I guess you call it the topic of we call karma or cause and effect, is a more like secular way of saying it. But the way I do the meditations on cause and effect is a little bit different. It's not anything different in the path. It's just a different ordering. And because what I found was in cause and effect, it's useful to think about, of course, that everything has a cause and so on, which helps. But what I found is that one of the biggest practices we do with cause and effect is to practice purification. So is to, at the end of each day, to think of the things we regret and to do some practice, which you can do in a deified way with Vajrasattva or in a more secular way, just with light, to kind of honestly regret, not feel guilty, but feel regret about the things you did during the day and understand that there's a cause of what brought that up. There was, in some ways, you couldn't have done anything else. But then to kind of forgive yourself using some kind of a ritualized meditation. So you don't have to go to bed worrying about that thing and in some ways worry about it for the rest of your life. That's like, in some ways, that's the normal Buddhist view. But I found even that makes a lot of people pretty neurotic and upset, like bringing up. So actually now, before meditating on what I call self-forgiveness rather than purification, I call that self-forgiveness, rejoicing. So like that practice of rejoicing, I found for myself and for a lot of like people new and not new to this path, to spend a pretty big amount of time before thinking about the things you regret from the day of all the things that you are really happy or proud of from the day. And it's such a huge list when you start thinking about it, that you made breakfast for my daughter, I helped, I gave a homeless person some money, helped this, what did I do with some lady? I helped with something. Oh yeah, I gave a lady a seat on the plane. You just think through your day and it's, who was it? The Dalai Lama said civilization is kindness. So beautiful and so important to remember right now because it doesn't seem that way when you look at the news. It definitely focuses on the worst things going on, and there are a lot of bad things going on. But like our everyday lives and the everyday lives of just about everybody, even soldiers, almost all day long, they're nice to each other. That's actually how they get people to fight in wars because they've shown that nobody wants to fight in the war for the most part. There are a couple of some sociopaths, but in general, nobody wants to kill another person. And they had all these problems during World War II, where they found most of the ammunition was being shot above the heads of the enemy because people don't want to kill each other. So there's two ways to get over that. One is to demonize the enemy and say they aren't human at all. They're rats, they're scum, and whatever. But even that didn't work as effectively as love. Love was more powerful, the love for your little team. So your band of brothers, if it's all men, the 6 men in your squadron or whatever it's called, that's what keeps people fighting, is their love for each other. It's hard to hear this right now. Like it's scary, right? Because people are dying right now. But the force, even unifying those armies, is love. It's actually the love that they feel toward their fellow fighters, because a lot of the people, most people in the war, don't totally believe in the cause, but they do believe in protecting the people they're close to and they care about. So just realizing that every day, just about everyone's actions, including your own, are mostly beneficial. People don't punch you as you're walking down the street. People are quite nice for the most part. It's rare for harmful actions to occur, even though we each do a couple every day. So that massive stage, like equal amount rejoicing, spend an equal amount of time or even more rejoicing in all the good things you do every day. I found that's much more effective for like our types of minds and my type of mind, is to remind myself like, oh yeah, I did mostly good things today, but very specific, not just general vague, oh, I did some good things today, but try to remember. It's just like when you make someone smile, I'll tell you a really easy way to make people happy is just ask how they're doing. It's often like, especially if you call for customer service, it's funny, I'll call someone for customer service, like, how are you doing? And it's almost like you can hear their sigh of relief, like, like the first time someone has asked them that today. So to just look at people with humanity. but we do all these things naturally. We do many, many kind things every day. So that's what I would say is just that I categorize these two practices under the cause and effect topic in the book, which is rejoicing, and then also the self-forgiveness. You want to call it purification practice, as most of us know it. So that's what there's a lot more, of course, but that's the one that comes to mind immediately. Yeah, any other questions?
I might just come off of what you just said, just to clarify one thing when you said about the purification practice and then regret but not guilty.
Yeah.
I remember when Geshe-la was here, this topic came up and we spent about an hour on, or more on that. I mean, how to review with healthy regret versus guilt. And you said it real quick, but it's a really big topic. So I don't know if you have any more.
Sure. I had my own experience with my own Geshe-la with the same thing, right? Like I didn't understand, like, how can you do that? How can you feel regret without guilt? I didn't even understand like that was possible, right? So the same thing, Geshe Dakpa in San Francisco, who's my main Tibetan teacher for many years, decades. When he first gave that teaching, I said, Geshe-la, what's the difference between guilt and regret? And he said, guilt is, having done something you think is wrong and thinking you're a bad person for it. It's what we're saying, opposite of self-compassion. It's self-hatred, thinking I'm a jerk, I'm a bad person for having done that. Regret is just sincerely thinking, okay, that wasn't helpful. Not helpful for me, not helpful for the other person. And I would prefer not to have done it. And then, make a resolve to do something else in the future. And some ritual. You do need something a little mystical, I think, to, I think we understand that very well in Tibetan Buddhism. We need a lot very mystical. You do need some kind of mystical thing to help you get past it. For some people, it's going for a run, or going for a swim. That's their daily purification practice. So it lets them kind of release everything and move on. Some people, I know people who are very extraordinarily compassionate, really like bodhisattva level people who don't meditate at all. And their meditation is either exercise or nature, that they find a way to connect to themselves or to the universe through, exercise or going out into the Sierras and so on. Is that what you heard from? It was a similar thing about regret and guilt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Many layers.
Yeah. Yeah, you can go into it for a long time. Yeah.
Probably another different way of saying it, but the way I think about it is regret is, to me, actually taking ownership. So it's like a step, many steps beyond guilt. You feel guilty you can feel guilty for years and years and years, but then you finally take ownership of it and say, wow, I did this. It was not good. I feel bad about it. And I'm going to resolve to try and do better and even better. And with that comes a lot of release.
Yeah.
I find.
It's amazing if you've ever seen people who were sought for a crime for a long time and they turn themselves in. It's very surprising because they look really relieved. They often look very, very relieved, and in interviews and so on, you see that people really want to absolve themselves, and to the point that they'd rather go to prison, than to live with that guilt. So that was their purification practice, was to, go and confess to the justice system, however imperfect that is.
And I want to say it's just a comment that my faith in humanity was restored last night during the first 20 minutes of ABC Nightly News that focused entirely on the eclipse. It was just watching the joy of little kids and everyone just looking up and seeing the eclipse. It was just so amazing.
Yeah,
change.
That's wonderful. I just came back. I went to Alba, Texas with my family to a bunch of friends rented a small, I couldn't figure out a way to fit into the topic of renunciation. So I wasn't going to mention it, but now that you did, I was never seen a total eclipse, and I was really shocked at the experience, because at that moment of totality, like we all started crying. Like the emotion was absolutely profound. It's like a very profound sense of, it's that sense of being beyond the boundaries of your body, you know, that sense of smallness and tightness we often have, totally, like instantly dissolved by seeing your connection to the cosmos, your connection to the moon. And the, like they say, awe is this funny combination of feeling very, very small and insignificant and very big at the same time, like that weird combination of tininess and giantness and connection between the same thing we're saying. We keep talking about dualities and transcending dualities. It was very fun. Now I want to go to chase. Now I'm attached to eclipses. I go see the next ones. But I could not believe it. Just shows there's some bigger things in the universe bigger than, like, why does an eclipse make you cry? You know, that's not something. It's something deep that just falls out of the structure of the universe itself. It's so beautiful. And it did look how we need more things like that in the news, though. You know, there's things that cooking dinner for your family could unite the whole world. Like, what if there was a channel of that, you know, on TV, just like the nice meal everyone made for each other every day, including in Ukraine and the Gaza Strip, and you know, everybody taking care of each other, even in the war zones. Anything else? We have time.
Sheila, Michael, do we have any questions online? I think that's it.
Great. Well, thanks very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I really admire and honor this community. So it's nice to be here in person. Thanks for spending a little time together.